Welcome to the City Current Show, powered by Hagen-Botham Insurance and Financial Services.
This show focuses on sharing good news and powering the good in our community. Now here's your host, Andrew Bartolotta.
Welcome back to the City Current Show, where we bring you inspiring stories of individuals and organizations making a difference in our community and around the globe. I'm your host, Andrew Bartolotta, and today we have the privilege of hosting Jody Maberry, a man who has traversed an extraordinary path from being a financial analyst to living out his dream as a park ranger and finally becoming known as the happiest podcaster on earth. Jody has hosted and produced over 2,000 podcast episodes across various industries, garnering millions of downloads. So we look forward to talking about his experience, sharing the stage with governors, best-selling authors, and executives from prestigious and lovable companies like Disney and Universal. Jody's journey is a testament really to how the power of following one's passion and the impact of effective communication through podcasting. Jody, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, Andrew, you made me sound so interesting. I can't wait to hear this conversation.
There we go. You are so interesting. And I think that we have a fun conversation in store. First, talk about what inspired you to make the leap from financial analyst to park ranger.
Well, that is, I like that story because it's something that I wish more people would have the chance to do. So I was a financial analyst. I measured interest rate risk for a commercial bank. That is as exciting as it sounds. And then one time I was close to my granny, and my granny passed away. And during that process, I just thought, my goodness, if I'm really good at my job, who benefits? You know, shareholders, things like that. That's all great, but why not find a way to do something a little more meaningful, closer to what I'm passionate about? So I decided to become a park ranger, which when you are a financial analyst, that is a little bit of a stretch. So I had to go back to school at night to get enough natural science credits. So that whole process of deciding to become a ranger, going back to school, 1 year. So it took a little while to make happen, but it was worth it because being a park ranger is as wonderful as you imagine. Unless you don't like the outdoors, then I'm sure it's just a terrible job, but I personally loved it.
Well, I am no fan of spiders or bugs or wildlife coming up to you at fast-paced speeds, but there is beauty, and I love nature when it comes to the respite and the wellness benefits of that. My family loves going to the Great Smoky Mountains throughout the year and just taking in that beautiful scenery. How did your experience as a park ranger shape your approach to now podcasting and communication?
The biggest way that it did is learning interpretation because I all park rangers, I was a law enforcement ranger, but you have to give interpretive talks at some point. And the first one I did, I just did terrible. If we had time, I'd tell you the whole story, but I did terrible. And I set out to find out, why are other park rangers so interesting? And why did my talk not seem to go well? And that was when I discovered interpretation and all the things that go behind it. And there's one particular book that was the first book written about interpretation. It's still the best. I kind of use that as my guide and talk to other park rangers, just other people that were good storytellers, took in some of what the National Association for Interpretation had to offer. And through all of that, I learned how to interpret, how to be an interpreter. And as it turns out, it works really well for podcasting. It works really well on the stage if you're giving a presentation. And so that I've carried with me. That is one of the skill. And I wonder if maybe it stuck with me so well because it didn't come natural and I really bombed in the beginning and I had to work hard to figure out why were some other people so good at it and I wasn't. And so that journey of trying to figure out how to give a good campfire talk and an interpretive hike and all the things you see park rangers do, the struggle to get good at that kind of stuck with me and helps me now in all the podcasts I get to do.
That is so cool. And I love that there are some similarities there, because you went from financial analyst to park ranger. Then what was the catalyst for transitioning from park ranger to podcasting?
Well, I was a park ranger for 8 years, and ended up leaving for a few reasons, family related, park ranger related. We liked the area we lived in, and it seemed like the only chance we had to stay was for me to leave parks. And so we did that. And then I became a marketing director at a luxury home builder. And I went back to school to get an MBA, and I realized, gosh, I still love parks, but I don't want to go back and be a park ranger. What could I possibly do? And I discovered podcasting, and a friend, Jared Easley, who was is the host of Star of the Doubts. He had me co-host an episode with him, and we ended up doing several. But that first time when I co-hosted, I realized this is what I can do. All those great conversations, only record them and other people can join in. So the first podcast I ever put out, hosted, produced, it's still available. I still do it. 10 years later, is called the Park Leader Show. And it is a podcast for park rangers. And that podcast was my way to still be involved with parks, because I still love parks as much as the day I became a park ranger. That was my way to still be involved in parks, but I did not realize the doors it would open and the opportunities it would open. And there'd be 2,000 episodes across all the different podcasts, and I'd end up working with Disney people, but it still has kept me connected to parks. And in just next month, I will be speaking to Michigan State Parks, and a couple times a year I get to go and talk to park people. So it keeps me very active in what's going on in the park world.
Well, it's really cool to then see how your love for podcasting, your gift for communication and interpretation, now you can use it across different mediums, but then still have that love and respect for the parks and be able to plug into that and shine a light on the parks and be an advocate for our national parks and everything that you were doing there, which is a really cool synergy there. So you've been producing and hosting podcasts for now over a decade. How have you seen the podcasting landscape change since then, which I can imagine is quite a bit? And what are some of the opportunities you've seen created because of this platform?
Those are questions I love talking about, because podcasting has been so good to me. Almost everything I do now has been built on the back of podcasting, and it has changed, as you mentioned, it has changed so much. But yet some of the foundation of what makes a good podcast is still exactly what it was 10 years ago. What has changed, though, is how much easier it has become to record, to produce, to edit. The addition of AI into podcasting is tremendous. To think back how manual everything was, and AI will never replace what we're doing, but what it does is it can help with editing, it can help with show notes, it can help with so many other ways. It's easier to get your podcast in front of people more than it used to be. Now, the other side of all of that, so it's become easier, it's become more popular, and it's become more available. So the other side is there are way more podcasts now than there were 10 years ago. But there's still way less podcasts than there are YouTube channels and blogs and all of that. So there is still a huge opportunity in podcasting, because if if a park ranger can have a show for park rangers, you can have a show about anything. You can have a show about knitting, for example. Just you could be a grandmother who just wants to talk about knitting. The opportunity is there and people will find it. And 10 years ago, I started a podcast for a group of people that were not looking for a podcast, did not know they needed a podcast, but I showed up and recorded and they found me and I found them and it worked out great. Now it's easier to find the people that want to listen to your topic. Podcasts are more accepted, more listened to now than they were then. They're not quite as foreign. So I think that is where the opportunity is, that it has become so easy to do a podcast. It's become a little more, well, even your iPhone is almost, as it is, it's almost good enough to just record right on your iPhone and make it a published episode. And I just think there's so many opportunities for audio content. And I know video content has really been the drive lately, but I still have a fondness for audio because it's so intimate. When think about what people are doing when they listen to you. They're walking their dog, they're walking in the park, they're doing the dishes, they're pulling weeds in the backyard. They're just living their life and you're with them in their ears. And I just think that's such a wonderful opportunity. And so, yeah, video certainly has its place, but I have a special soft spot for audio content like podcasting. And I just think it's such a wonderful way to connect to people. And in some ways, maybe we're just getting started with podcasts because there's things we haven't thought of yet. There's new ways it'll be used. Perhaps more places can use it, almost like having a park ranger in your pocket. You go to a park and there's a podcast that just guides you around the park. That can be done in museums. It can be done around cities. I just think in many ways, we're just getting started with what podcasting has to offer.
Well said, especially because like you mentioned, you've have this over decade years of experience, but you've seen it change so much that the next decade is still exciting. The best is yet to come. And because of the technological advances throughout the pandemic, through remote work and such, even through the City Current show, we're able to have this conversation much more easily now and record it than we could have half a decade ago. And so it is really cool to see. And then across mediums, being able to, whether you're listening to this on the radio, you're listening to this on the podcast on demand, or you're watching us on TV, there are many mediums in which this interview in itself is transcended across sectors. And so that's a really cool way of how podcasts can be replicated and redistributed to then reach another mass audience as well. And so you've worked with so many different industries, including executives from, like we mentioned, Disney and Universal, which must have been fascinating. Talk about maybe, or share a highlight from one of these experiences.
Well, I will tell you one on how I got started in that. I have a really close friendship and partnership with Lee Cockrell, who ran Walt Disney World for 10 years. And he then wrote the book, Creating Magic. So I had the Park Leader Show, and I wanted to talk to someone from Disney about what natural parks, state parks, you've got, I mean, Tennessee has some wonderful state parks. I love visiting Tennessee. But national parks, state parks, county parks, what can we learn from themed parks like Disney? But I didn't have a connection at Disney. I found the book, Creating Magic. I bought it, reached out to the author, and I thought, this guy ran Disney World. I'm not going to hear back from him. He's not going to come on a podcast for park rangers. Well, what I didn't know, his sister-in-law was a park ranger for more than 30 years. And so when he got the offer to come talk to park rangers on a podcast, he said yes. And short version of the story, within a few months, we had launched his podcast that I host for him creating Disney magic. And we're closing in on 500 episodes over 10 years, and it has gone really well. And I found when you do really good work for someone high profile, then people start reaching out and saying, can you help me do what Lee does? And so that opened up a lot of opportunities I never saw coming. Podcasts about real estate, pharmacy, travel, book publishing, all of that came from doing that. But it also allowed Lee and I over the years got really close, and we started creating other content together, courses. We started the Cockrell Academy. We do live events together. We started some new workshops, and that it is just fascinating to get to know. I've never worked for Disney, had never been to Disney World prior to working with Lee, but now I know behind the scenes operations so well because of my work with Lee Cockrell, his son, Dan Cockrell, who was the vice president of Magic Kingdom, Dewan Rivers, vice president of Animal Kingdom. I've gotten to work with some fabulous people and just get so much insight. And so there is some really good crossover. Some of the best leaders I know are in parks, but they're very humble. They're not out in front because that's just how park people are. So there's a lot of crossover between what I'm learning about natural parks, what I'm learning about themed parks. And I have found when I'm talking to people that aren't in parks, they love park ranger stories and Disney stories. People like Disney stories. And then park people like to hear also how natural parks can run like themed parks. Although, you have to be careful there because they're much different mission, but a lot of what they do is the same. It's because it's serving people with a bigger purpose. So it has just been fantastic. And I have met some of the most incredible people, and Disney is one of those companies where people stay 30, 40 years when they get there. So to hear how that company's changed over the years and some of the experience that the leaders from Disney has, it's just incredible. It's been a wonderful experience. And every year I seem to get to meet a couple new leaders I usually meet them after they retire from the company, and then I end up meeting them, and they just the stories, and then each story is almost like little puzzle pieces, and then or little pieces of a quilt, I guess. And over the years, as I meet more of them and get more stories and hear how things happened, it's like just putting this big quilt together. It's been so fun getting to know all the Disney people.
That is fascinating. And there are so many lessons that you can learn in any industry from a Disney executive or even a frontline Disney worker, theme park worker. And I love that there's crossover between lessons learned from those natural parks to the theme park lands. And what a great experience and breadth of industry knowledge that you get to gain from hearing those stories and then sharing them with others. For those that are listening or watching saying, I want some of that, I want to start my own podcast, how do you ensure longevity? What advice do you give someone that's just starting out on a podcast?
Well, depending on what numbers you look at, the average podcast we'll go with the higher number, last 10 episodes. And that's it, because I think enthusiasm can carry you through 7 episodes, and then the hard work begins. So part of it is just realizing what are the traps that people fall in. And I've found there's 3. One, editing is for most people kind of a stinker. Not everybody likes editing. The other is it gets difficult to show up every week and have something to say. Like I said, enthusiasm gets you through 7, 8, 9 episodes. And then the hard work begins because you have to get a little more creative, or you have to keep digging and finding guests. And so that's one. The other is people often think it's kind of like the Field of Dreams. If you build it, he will come. Well, with podcasts, we fall into the trap of thinking if I record it, he will listen, and that's not always true. It takes a lot of work, and you just have to stick with it. So I think together, collectively, those three things kind of shake a lot of people out because my goodness, I don't like editing, and it's starting to become work, and I don't have a whole lot of listeners yet, and then people just kind of drop out. So understanding that those are the traps help you prepare yourself for them. And I think planning out at least 10 episodes before you record one helps with that. And then after you get 5 done, then plan out the next 5. And that way you kind of have your eye in the future and you're excited about that content, and you're not showing up on Tuesday thinking, oh no, I need my episode for Thursday. What do I do? Like the first time you fall into that and you miss your publish date that you've set, because there's really no one else holding you accountable, then you'll say, all right, well, it wasn't that big a deal that I missed that episode. Maybe I'll just take a couple weeks off, which often turns into more than a couple weeks. So I would say to get started, understand what the traps are, prepare yourself to combat those traps before they hit you. And then there's a lot of great resources out there to help you get started. If you have equipment questions or content questions, you can find resources. And then my last piece of advice is don't think you need a big studio, $6,000 of equipment to get going. My microphone is about $70.
We have really been able to help others start their podcast as well in several different industries. And those that succeed are ones that are organized when it comes to content creation. They are fueled not by viewers, but by the impact that they're making and the ripple effect of that. What are some of the ways that you measure success of a podcast, both for yourself and for your clients, beyond just viewer count?
I am glad you asked that question. To me, that is one of the most important, because people often just think about how many people are listening or watching and how am I going to get paid from this? But the impact is so much bigger, so much bigger. If nothing else, let's just say no one but your mother listens. I still think a podcast is worth it, because you discover some pretty neat things about yourself if you have to show up every week with something to say. You start to understand what you believe, you get clarity about why you believe it, you get good at talking about it. That alone, to me, is worth it. The other is, are you actually giving valuable content to people that really helps them? And if you feel that you are, even if 10 people listen, it's worth it. And I took this to quite a different extreme. I have a podcast with an intended audience of 1. My son went away to college. I wasn't going to see him every day anymore. I put this on all the podcast channels, but I said, I don't care if I get 1 download a day, I'm happy, because it's a daily podcast and that means my son is listening to it. So if you have that mindset that it's not, so Creating Disney Magic is a popular show, and it's really easy to fall into the trap of how many downloads are we getting? But more important, I've found I get more reward out of the email that we get from people saying this episode helped in this way, or even that people trust us enough to send in questions that we will answer on the show. That don't underestimate how important that is, that someone trusts you and your podcast enough to send in a question to get answered on the show. That is very meaningful. So if you look for the other metrics other than downloads or viewers, are you hearing from people? Are people asking questions? that is what to me matters the most. I have an episode of my show that I thought, well, no, but I found it an interesting topic. It was about your outgoing voicemail message. So my thought was, if I if you were to call me, Andrew, and I didn't answer the phone, I missed the chance to make a good impression on you. So I said, well, I will then use my voicemail message to make a good impression on Andrew when he calls. And it worked really well for me. I get great voicemail left on my voicemail. So I thought I'll make a podcast episode about it. And then when I was done, I'm like, man, that episode is so narrow. It's about one little thing. Are people really going to enjoy that? And it was probably 4 or 5 years ago. And so I just taught a workshop in Orlando this past week, and someone at that workshop came up and talked to me about that episode and that he changed his voicemail because of it. And he got and that more than any other episode I've done, that episode has gotten feedback. And as a podcaster, my goodness, you could see I'll just use a round number. Let's say you hit 1,000 downloads for the first time. You think that's exciting. It's more exciting to get very personal feedback and engagement from someone that listens to your show. I would rather have 10 people that listen and do something with it than 1,000 people that listen that I never hear from.
Yes. And thank you for reminding us that value isn't based on viewer count alone, for sure. It's about the impact that you're able to make and the lessons learned by those listening and the actions made and the stories told and those personal details that they can reference months later, years later to you when they meet you in person at a workshop. That's what's been really exciting for me as well, when sometimes it feels like an echo chamber and you have a business owner call you after their episode airs and say, I had the biggest sale week ever. And you're going, someone listened, several people listened. This is amazing. And it makes it all worth it. What are maybe your top 3 to 5 AI tools or trends or resources that you say you're starting a podcast, you already host a podcast, that you should use or implement?
Well, depending on your processes, I have found Zapier helps a lot because it cuts back on email so much. When we would create an episode, we would always have to email back and forth. It's in this folder and whatnot. Well, Zapier sends alerts. That's a great tool. Also, look into show note tools like CapShow or Cast Magic. Those are fantastic. They've gotten so good now. I probably wouldn't publish them straight as the AI creates them word for word, but oh my goodness, to get a head start where 95% of it's done for you is just wonderful. That's one of the big holdups, I think, is show notes and just the process involved in that. And then there are some wonderful publishing platforms that if you have a podcast already, you probably already have one you like. But if you don't, just research some of those. I know there's some great ones out there. I use Libsyn, so I will mention that one just as a way to be able to put an episode one place and it shows up everywhere else. That, to go back to one of your early questions, that has been one of my favorite advancements in podcasting, is as the host platforms have gotten better, you can get such a bigger reach by being in one place. So find the hosting platform that works best for you, because it will save you hours and hours of work and allow you to show up in all the places you need to be.
I love that. I would echo that as well, because your time is very precious and there's probably most likely a tool that can help. There's a pain point that you have either with editing, with finding great guests, with creating the cover art. There's a space or a part in the journey that you struggle with that there is a tool or resource or person that you can contract out to help with. Some of my favorite tools, we use Simplecast at cityCURRENT, similar to Libsyn, where it puts it on all of the different platforms that you sign up with, which is a huge benefit. I love Opus Pro for creating some short form videos from our interviews. And then I used to do even our TV shows through iMovie and was like, okay, I need to set this up. So now I use CapCut. I was using Premiere Pro, and I still use Premiere Pro a lot, Adobe Audition for editing podcasts too. But CapCut has been a huge advancement time frame wise for me. So there's some really great tools out there. So I would just encourage anyone that has a pain point, start asking questions, reach out to Jody, reach out to me, reach out to those in the podcast community that are more than happy to provide you with links to resources or bring you on their team to then produce the podcast themselves. That's really cool. So for those that are inspired by your journey, they want to take the first step to podcasting, they want to reach out to you, they want to host you for a workshop, what have you, how do they reach you, Jody?
Well, the best place to go is jodymaberry.com. That's my home on the web. And even if you spell my last name wrong, it should get you there. Because I know my last name is often misspelled. So I have the domain for both the right spelling and the wrong spelling to get you there. And there you'll be able to I have a guide on there called Podcast Magic. You can get that. That'll help you get started, or just reach out, ask questions. There are since we were talking about tools to help with podcasting, there are new ones coming out all the time that I tinker with and see are they great? And maybe you have questions about some of those, and we can help. And then jodymaberry.com, or just send me an email, jody@jodymaberry.com, or on my website, there's a contact form. I'm happy to answer any questions. I usually try to go to the big podcast conferences every year. Podcast Movement is wonderful. Podfest is in Orlando. I try to go to one or both of those every year. And the great thing about that is there's so many people there willing to help and answer questions and get you started. So yeah, please do reach out. If anything we talked about was interesting, reach out. I'm happy to help you along the way.
Well, thank you, Jody. Lastly, what puts a smile on your face when you look at the work that you've done, from being a financial analyst to park ranger to podcast host and producer? What is the driving force that puts a smile on your face at the end of the day?
I think what one of the big ones is that it just seems so unconventional. Financial analyst to park ranger to podcaster, that I hope through the work that I've done, I help inspire you to realize that I don't have to do what I'm supposed to do or what people thought I should do. Or even if I went to school to be a financial analyst, I don't have to do that anymore. I can go be a park ranger. So when someone tells me that I help inspire them to make a change or even to get better at the work they do, that always brings a smile to my face. That's you've felt it too. That's bigger than download numbers. That's bigger than most stuff. Just to even one person to say, you really helped me out, that makes me smile every day.
There's freedom in knowing that you're not chained to what other people expect you to be, or maybe even the path that you started, and being able to go against the grain per se. So yeah. I love the answer. That's inspiring. Jody Maberry, thank you so much for sharing invaluable insights into the world of podcasting, emphasizing the importance of engaging content, but also the power of storytelling and living a purposeful life as well. Thank you for coming on the show, empowering the good in our community and around the globe.
Thank you. It's so great to be with you, Andrew.